On the night of our first wedding anniversary, exactly 12 months after I signed the marriage license, my husband pressed a crystal whiskey glass into my hand and whispered that I needed to smile wider because his boss was worth more than $3 million in contracts. Then he nudged my lower back hard enough to look like affection from a distance and told me to pour the drink slowly so the man could enjoy the view. If you've ever been humiliated in a room full of people who pretended not to see it, you already know the kind of silence I'm talking about. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever realized in one single moment that the person you trusted most had quietly been preparing to sell you piece by piece? If you have, you already understand why I didn't react the way most people expect. I smiled, and that was the beginning of everything. My name is Vanessa Caldwell. I was 29 years old that night, working as a licensed nail technician at a salon in Mesa, Arizona. Not glamorous, not impressive, but steady. I made about $48,000 a year, including tips, paid my taxes, and never owed anyone a dollar. My husband, Tyler Brooks, liked to say he rescued me from that life. Tyler was 34, a regional sales manager for a commercial refrigeration company. He loved tailored suits, expensive watches he couldn't afford, and networking events where he could laugh too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. When we met, he told me he admired how hardworking I was. After we got married, he started calling it small time. The anniversary party was his idea, not mine. He insisted on hosting it at a private event room inside an upscale steakhouse in Scottsdale. The bill alone was over $6,800, more than my entire monthly income. He told me it was an investment in his future. What he didn't say was that I was part of that investment. At first, the evening looked normal. There were about 30 guests, mostly his colleagues and a few of their spouses. Gold balloons spelled out 1 year across the back wall. Soft jazz played through overhead speakers. The smell of grilled ribeye hung heavy in the air. I wore a navy blue dress I'd bought on clearance for $79. Khaled told me it looked simple but acceptable. Around 8:40 p.m., his boss arrived. Gerald Whitmore, 58 years old, silver hair, custom Italian suit. The kind of man who didn't shake hands, he let people hold his fingers. Tyler rushed to greet him like a teenager meeting a celebrity, and then he called me over. "Vanessa," he said with that tight smile he used when he was performing, "bring Mr. Whitmore a drink. He appreciates good service." Service, not introduction. Not meet my wife. Service. I remember the exact moment something shifted inside me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It felt like a door quietly closing. Gerald Whitmore didn't even look at my face when I handed him the whiskey. His eyes stayed fixed on my chest the entire time. Then he said something that made the room feel suddenly smaller. "Tyler," he chuckled, "you didn't tell me your wife was this cooperative." Tyler laughed, and replied, "She knows how to support my career." That was the first layer of betrayal, the one everyone could see. But here's the thing that kept me standing there, smiling, instead of throwing the glass in his face. 2 weeks before that night, I had accidentally seen something I wasn't supposed to. A document, a legal document. It had both of our names on it, and a number so large I thought at first it was a typo. $420,000. I didn't understand it then. Not fully, but I understood enough to know one thing. Tyler wasn't just embarrassed by me. He was planning something. And that night, watching him practically offer me up like part of a business deal, I realized exactly how far he was willing to go. Gerald took a slow sip of the whiskey and leaned closer to me. "You pour very carefully," he said. I didn't answer. Tyler stepped in quickly. "She's very detail-oriented," he said proudly. "It's why she handles paperwork so well." Paperwork. That word landed like a stone in my stomach. Because I had never handled any of his paperwork. Not once. So why did he say that? Why did his boss nod like that made perfect sense? And why, at that exact moment, did Tyler's hand tighten on my wrist just slightly, like a warning? That was when I knew. I wasn't just being humiliated. I was being positioned. Prepared. Used. Let me ask you something else. If you realized the person you married had been quietly building a situation where you had no control, no information, and no way out, would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait? I chose to wait. Because something in Tyler's eyes that night told me the truth was bigger than an anniversary party. Bigger than one disgusting boss. Bigger than a humiliating moment with a whiskey glass. There was a plan, and I was already inside it. The night ended with applause, cake, and photos, where Tyler's arm wrapped tightly around my waist like he owned me. But when we got home, I noticed something strange. He didn't go to bed. He went straight to his home office, locked the door, and stayed inside for almost 2 hours. And through the thin hallway wall, I heard one sentence clearly. "Yeah," Tyler said quietly on the phone. "She still doesn't know about the transfer." The transfer. At that moment, I didn't know what that meant. I only knew one thing for certain. Whatever he had planned. It had already started. 3 days after our anniversary party, at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, I watched my husband transfer $15,000 out of a joint account we had opened together, without telling me, without hesitation, and without even closing the banking app afterward. He simply locked his phone and left it on the kitchen counter, like he assumed I would never check. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. Tyler wasn't being careful anymore. He was being confident. Confident that I wouldn't question him. Confident that I didn't understand enough to stop him. And most of all, confident that I was already trapped. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought you were too small to fight back, you know exactly how dangerous that kind of confidence can be. Because it makes them sloppy. And sloppy people leave evidence. Before I tell you what I did next, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how betrayal rarely starts with one big dramatic lie? It starts with small financial shifts, quiet changes, tiny movements that don't feel worth arguing about at first. That's exactly how Tyler had been doing it. Looking back, the signs had been there for months. He began insisting we streamline our finances after we got married. He told me it was smarter for tax planning, for credit building, for future investments. He said all married couples did it. He said it would make our life easier. So I agreed to close my personal savings account and move everything into a joint one. At the time, I had $38,200 saved from years of working double shifts at the salon. It was my safety net. My independence. My emergency exit if life ever went wrong. Tyler called it our foundation. But what I didn't realize was how quickly that foundation was shifting under my feet. At first, he controlled small things. He insisted on paying the mortgage himself. He handled insurance. He said he'd optimize our credit cards. Then he began using phrases that sounded supportive, but weren't. "You don't need to stress about money. I'll take care of the big decisions. Just focus on your job." And slowly, without a single argument, I stopped seeing detailed statements. He set up paperless billing. He changed passwords for security. He told me it was all routine. I believed him. Until 2 weeks before the anniversary party. That was when I saw the document. It happened by accident. Tyler had left his office printer running while he took a call outside. When I walked past, I saw pages sliding into the tray. At first, I didn't intend to look, but my name caught my eye, Vanessa Caldwell Brooks, and below it, a bold heading, Spousal Authorization Agreement. I remember feeling confused more than alarmed. Why would I need to authorize anything? Then I saw the number, $420,000. My hands started shaking before I even understood why. The document described a business credit line secured jointly under both our names. But there was a line that made my stomach drop. Primary liability assigned to Vanessa Caldwell Brooks. Primary liability. Not shared, assigned, meaning if anything went wrong, I would be the one legally responsible, not Tyler. Me. I didn't finish reading that day, because at that exact moment, Tyler walked back into the house. And I realized something instinctively. If he knew I had seen that document, he would change his plan immediately. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I pretended I saw nothing. I walked away, smiled, acted normal. That's why at the anniversary party, when he told his boss I handled paperwork, something inside me went ice cold. Because that lie wasn't random. It was preparation. He was building a narrative, setting the stage for something. And now, watching him casually move $15,000 out of our joint account like it was pocket change, I understood what that transfer phone call might mean. He was moving money, fast, quietly, systematically, out of accounts that still had my name attached. That afternoon, I did something I had never done in our marriage. I checked his email, not because I wanted to spy, because I finally understood I might be in real danger financially. What I found made my chest feel tight. There were dozens of messages between Tyler and Gerald Whitmore. Most of them were about business contracts, but one thread, dated 6 weeks before our anniversary, stood out. The subject line read, "Structure finalized." I clicked it. Gerald had written, "Once the credit line clears, we can shift liability cleanly. Just make sure your wife signs the secondary authorization without drawing attention." My heart started pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Tyler, she trusts me. That was when I fully understood. I wasn't just being excluded from financial decisions. I was being positioned as a legal shield, a buffer, a fall person. If the business deal failed, if the debt couldn't be repaid, if something illegal happened, the entire financial liability would land on me, not him. And suddenly, that anniversary party humiliation took on a completely different meaning. He wasn't just degrading me. He was proving something to his boss. That I was controllable. That I would comply. That I would never resist. Let me ask you something. If you discovered your spouse was quietly preparing to bury you under nearly $500,000 of debt, without your knowledge, would you confront them immediately? Or would you start gathering proof first? I chose proof. Because I had seen something else in those emails. A date. A very specific date. September 30th. That was when the full credit line would activate. And when I checked the calendar, I realized something that made my stomach twist. That date was only 21 days away. 21 days before my entire financial life could be legally destroyed. But the most chilling detail wasn't the money. It was one final sentence at the end of Gerald Whitmore's last email. A sentence that didn't sound like business at all. It sounded like a warning. Make sure she stays cooperative until everything is finalized. Cooperative. The same word he had used when he looked at me that night, holding a whiskey glass while Tyler watched. At that moment, sitting alone in the kitchen, I realized something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just a financial setup. It was a trap, and I was already standing inside it. 17 days before the September 30th deadline, at 6:10 in the morning, I sat in my car outside the bank with a printed statement in my lap showing that exactly $72,400 had already disappeared from our joint savings account in less than 4 months. And when I checked the transaction details, every single transfer had one identical label, auth by primary account holder. My name, not Tyler's. Mine. That was the moment I understood something cold and irreversible. He hadn't just been moving money. He had been building a legal trail that made it look like I was the one doing it. If you've ever realized someone was quietly rewriting reality around you, turning your own identity into a tool against you, you know the kind of stillness that follows. It's not panic. It's not anger. It's clarity. Before I tell you what I did next, let me ask you something. If you discovered that your signature, your name, and your legal identity were being used to take on hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt without your consent, what would you do first? Would you go home and confront the person responsible? Or would you find out exactly how deep the damage already was? I chose the second. Because by that point, I already understood something critical about Tyler. He never acted without a plan. And that meant the financial moves I could see were probably only a fraction of what had already been set in motion. The bank manager's name was Daniel Reeves. He was a quiet man in his 40s who spoke in careful, neutral tones. The kind you hear from people who are trained to handle situations where emotions can explode quickly. When he reviewed the account history, his expression changed almost immediately. "Mrs. Brooks," he said slowly, "these transfers were authorized using your online credentials." I shook my head. "I never approved them." He hesitated before replying. "They were processed with two-factor authentication." My stomach tightened. Two-factor authentication meant someone had access to my phone, or had registered a device under my name. That's when something clicked. 6 months earlier, Tyler had insisted we upgrade our phones. He said it was part of a company reimbursement program. He had handled the setup himself, including security settings. At the time, I thought he was just being helpful. Now I realize he had likely registered a secondary authentication device, one I never knew existed, meaning every time he transferred money, the bank system recorded it as me. Daniel Reeves leaned forward slightly. "There's another issue," he said. He turned his monitor so I could see the screen. There was a credit account listed under my name. A business credit line. Exactly $420,000. My throat felt dry. "It was approved 8 weeks ago," he continued, "and it's already at 63% utilization." I stared at the number. $26,400 already drawn. And I had never signed anything. Never authorized anything. Never even knew it existed until now. "How is that possible?" I whispered. He hesitated again. Then he said something that made the room feel suddenly very small. "Because your digital signature is on every authorization form." My hands went cold. Digital signature. That meant Tyler hadn't forged paperwork in a sloppy way. He had used a legally recognized electronic authorization process, which meant undoing it wouldn't be simple. It wouldn't just be a marital dispute. It would be a full legal battle. And until it was proven fraudulent, the debt legally belonged to me. That was the second layer of betrayal. The one that turns emotional pain into financial destruction. I left the bank feeling like the ground under my life had shifted completely. But what hurt most wasn't the money. It was the realization of how long he must have been planning this. The phone upgrade. The account consolidation. The passwords he managed. The paperwork he said I didn't need to worry about. It hadn't been careless control. It had been calculated isolation. He had slowly removed every layer of my financial independence until I couldn't even see what was happening. That night, when Tyler came home, he acted completely normal. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, complained about a coworker, like nothing was wrong. Like I wasn't sitting there knowing he had quietly placed me under nearly $500,000 of liability. That was when I realized something chilling. He truly believed I still had no idea. And that belief made him relaxed, confident, careless, which meant he was likely about to make his biggest mistake yet. Around 9:30 p.m., while he was in the shower, his phone lit up on the nightstand. I wasn't planning to check it, but the message preview showed a name that made my heart start pounding. Gerald Whitmore, and the text read, "Make sure she signs the final consent at the investor dinner next week. After that, she's no longer our problem." Our problem. Not Tyler's problem. Our problem. Meaning, this wasn't just my husband's scheme. His boss was directly involved. I opened the message thread. There were dozens of texts. Most were short, businesslike, but one exchange from 3 days earlier froze me completely. "Once liability shifts fully, you can proceed with the divorce filing immediately. Tyler." That's the plan. She'll never see it coming. Divorce. Planned. Scheduled. Time to occur right after the debt became legally mine. In that moment, something inside me went completely still. Not broken. Not shattered. Still. because now I understood the full shape of what they intended. Tyler wasn't just trying to trap me financially. He was planning to walk away clean, free of debt, free of responsibility, free of me, and leave me buried under a financial ruin I didn't even create. Let me ask you something. If you discovered that your marriage wasn't just ending, but had been secretly transformed into a legal strategy designed to destroy you, would you still think of that person as your husband? Or would you start seeing them as an opponent? That night, as I lay next to him pretending to sleep, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to panic. I wasn't going to beg, because they believed I was weak, uninformed, compliant. They believed I was already trapped. And sometimes, the most dangerous position you can have in a war is when your enemy thinks you don't even know the battle has begun. But what Tyler and Gerald didn't realize yet was that I had just learned something even more important than the existence of the debt. I had learned the exact date of the investor dinner where they planned to finalize everything. September 22nd. 8 days before the credit line fully activated. 8 days before Tyler intended to file for divorce. And 8 days before they believed I would become legally responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars. What they didn't know was that I was already planning to be there, and not as the obedient, cooperative wife they expected. 14 days before the investor dinner, at exactly 11:38 p.m., I sat on the bathroom floor with my laptop open, calculating that if the $420,000 credit line fully shifted to my name, the minimum monthly payment alone would be $6,300 more than my entire take-home income. That meant one simple truth. Within 6 months, I would default. Within 9 months, my credit would be destroyed. Within a year, I could face wage garnishment, lawsuits, and possibly bankruptcy. And Tyler knew that, because he had built the entire plan around that timeline. If you've ever realized someone wasn't just betraying you emotionally, but had mapped out how long it would take for your life to collapse, you know how terrifying that level of calculation feels. Before I tell you what I did next, let me ask you something. If you discovered that your spouse had been preparing to financially erase you with the precision of a business strategy, would you still think of it as a personal betrayal? Or would you recognize it as something colder, a transaction? Because that was exactly what it was. Tyler hadn't just married me, he had leveraged me. That night, I finally allowed myself to replay every moment of our relationship from the beginning. And suddenly, patterns I had ignored became painfully clear. We met 3 years earlier at a nail salon where I worked. Tyler had come in with a coworker for a pedicure before a corporate retreat. He talked nonstop about deals, growth, ambition, how he wanted to build something big. He said he admired how focused I was. He said I felt stable. At the time, I thought that meant emotionally. Now I realized he meant financially predictable. He knew exactly how much I earned. He knew I had savings. He knew I had no debt. He knew I had never taken out a business loan or opened a major credit line. In other words, I had clean credit history, perfect for securing large financing. The more I thought about it, the more chilling the timeline became. 6 months after we started dating, he began talking about joint financial planning. 9 months in, he suggested we move in together to save money. A year later, he proposed, emphasizing how much easier taxes and investments would be as a married couple. Looking back, every milestone aligned perfectly with one thing, gradually tying my financial identity to his, not emotionally, legally. That realization made me feel sick, because it meant something even worse than betrayal. It meant I had never truly been his partner. I had been an asset. And now I was about to become a liability he planned to discard. The next morning, Tyler acted as normal as ever. He kissed my forehead, asked what I wanted for dinner, mentioned casually that he had a big investor meeting coming up. That phrase caught my attention immediately. Investor meeting, he repeated, tying his tie in the mirror. Just a formal dinner, nothing you need to worry about. Nothing I needed to worry about. Except it was the exact event where they planned to finalize the legal trap around me. I nodded calmly. Sounds important, I said. He smiled. It is. It could change everything for my career. Everything. Not our future. Not our marriage. His career. That was the moment I understood something else clearly. Tyler didn't see what he was doing as wrong. He saw it as strategic, necessary, smart. That level of moral detachment is what made him truly dangerous. Because people who justify betrayal as business don't feel guilt. They only feel inconvenience when they're caught. Later that afternoon, I took my first real step toward protecting myself. I went to a legal consultation. The attorney's name was Melissa Grant. Full name, Melissa Joanne Grant. A financial fraud specialist based in Tempe. She listened quietly as I explained everything. The unauthorized credit line, the digital signatures, the planned divorce. When I finished, she leaned back and said something that chilled me. This isn't just marital misconduct, she said. This could qualify as financial exploitation and conspiracy. Conspiracy. That word made my chest tighten because it confirmed what I had suspected. Gerald Whitmore wasn't just aware. He was actively involved. Melissa continued. But here's the problem, she added. Until we can prove fraud, the debt legally stands under your name. How do we prove it? I asked. Her answer was simple. Evidence of intent. Not just that Tyler moved money. Not just that documents existed. We needed proof that he deliberately manipulated the process to assign liability to me without informed consent. That meant communications, recorded instructions, witnesses, a clear timeline showing premeditation. In other words, we needed something that showed this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. And that was when she asked a question that changed everything. Do you have access to his communications with the business partners involved? I hesitated. Then I remembered the messages I had already seen. Yes, I said. Slowly. Melissa nodded. Good. Because if we can obtain clear proof before that credit line fully activates, we can stop the transfer. Stop it. Not just fight it later. Prevent it from ever becoming legally binding. That possibility felt like a breath of air after weeks of suffocation. But then she said something else. Timing is critical, she added. Once the final authorization is executed at that investor dinner, reversing it becomes much harder. My stomach tightened. September 22nd. That dinner wasn't just symbolic. It was the final step, the moment everything would become irreversible, unless I acted first. That night, when I returned home, Tyler was sitting at the kitchen island reviewing documents. I caught a glimpse of a familiar heading on one page. Secondary consent authorization. My name. My signature line. Already prepared, waiting. He quickly flipped the page over when he noticed me, but not before I saw something else. At the bottom of the document, there was a space labeled Witness Signature, and beneath it, a printed name, Gerald Whitmore. In that moment, a new realization settled into my mind like a stone. This wasn't just a financial trap. It was a legal performance, one where they intended to stage my consent in front of witnesses at a public event where no one would question it later. And as I stood there watching Tyler casually stack those papers like they meant nothing, I realized something that made my hands tremble slightly. The investor dinner wasn't just where they planned to finalize my destruction. It was also where they planned to make it look completely legitimate, which meant if I wanted to stop them, I would have to do it publicly, in front of everyone they believed would support their story. But what they didn't know yet was that I had already started preparing a different story to tell. 11 days before the investor dinner, at exactly 7:05 in the evening, Tyler slid a leather folder across the kitchen island and told me to just sign a few routine updates so his company could finalize a contract worth $2.8 million. He said it casually, like he was asking me to initial a grocery receipt. Not like he was asking me to legally attach myself to hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. That was the moment I realized something deeply disturbing. Tyler truly believed I would sign without reading, because that's what I had done every time before. If you've ever been conditioned to trust someone so completely that you stop questioning paperwork with your own name on it, you understand how dangerous that dynamic can become. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked back and realized the most powerful weapon someone used against you wasn't force or threats? It was your trust. Because that was exactly what Tyler had built his entire strategy on. Years of normalizing one simple habit. Don't worry about the details. That night, when I opened the folder, I already knew what I would find. But seeing it in front of me still made my pulse slow in a strange, cold way. There were 3 documents inside. The first was a summary of the business credit line, $420,000, secured under my legal responsibility. The second was a secondary consent authorization, stating that I acknowledged full liability in the event of default. And the third was a marital financial separation agreement. That last document made my fingers tighten slightly. It was dated 2 weeks after the upcoming investor dinner, exactly matching the timeline in Tyler's messages about filing for divorce. He had already prepared everything. The debt would shift fully to me. Then he would legally separate finances. Then he would file for divorce. Clean exit. No liability. No shared responsibility. Just a neatly executed financial escape plan. I looked up at him. He was watching me carefully. Not with concern. Not with love. With calculation. Just routine, he said smoothly. It's all standard for big business financing. Routine. Standard. 2 words designed to make people stop thinking. I nodded slowly. Of course, I said. You trust me with everything. It's only fair I support you. The relief on his face was immediate, visible, and that relief told me something critical. He wasn't confident anymore. He was nervous, because the final step of his plan depended entirely on one thing: my signature. And for the first time, I understood exactly how much power that gave me. I closed the folder gently. I'll sign it at the dinner, I said. It feels more official that way. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then smiled. Exactly, he replied. That's what I was thinking. But I could see the tension in his shoulders. He needed that signature before the dinner, because once we were in a public setting, he would have less control, which meant he would likely try to pressure me again soon. That was useful information, because it confirmed something Melissa Grant had told me earlier. People executing financial manipulation always become more aggressive as the deadline approaches. And that meant Tyler would make more mistakes. Mistakes I could document. The next morning, I took another step, one that felt quiet but powerful. I went to a different bank branch and opened a new personal account. In my name only. For the first time since our marriage, I had a financial space Tyler couldn't access. It wasn't about money. It was about independence, about reclaiming a small piece of control. But the real reason I went to that bank was something else. I needed certified records, and under federal law, I had the right to request full documentation of any credit line attached to my identity. When the bank officer printed the file, I felt my breath catch. There were dozens of authorization logs, each showing timestamps, IP addresses, device identifiers, all linked to digital signatures under my name. And one detail stood out immediately. The authorization device was registered to an email account I had never seen before. An account created 8 months earlier, under my name, but not by me. That was proof. Clear technical evidence that someone had impersonated my digital identity. And that meant something important legally. This wasn't just marital misconduct. It was identity fraud, which carried criminal consequences. When I showed the records to Melissa Grant later that afternoon, she nodded slowly. This changes everything, she said. How? I asked. Because now we can prove intent, she replied. He didn't just mislead you. He created a separate digital identity to execute financial transactions. That meant the legal stakes were far higher than Tyler likely realized, because financial fraud at this level over $250,000 already drawn, could trigger federal investigation, not just civil lawsuits, criminal charges. But Melissa warned me about something else. We still need confirmation that his business partner knowingly participated, she said. Gerald Whitmore. Without proof of his involvement, Tyler could claim he acted alone, which would protect the company, and possibly limit consequences. That meant I needed something very specific. Evidence that Gerald knew the debt was being shifted onto me without informed consent. And that evidence, most likely, would appear at the investor dinner, the final stage of their plan. That night, Tyler came home unusually cheerful. He poured himself a drink and said something that made my stomach tighten. "Everything's almost finalized," he said. "After next week, things will be so much easier." Easier. For him. I watched him quietly. And for the first time, I noticed something I had never seen before. Impatience, not just eagerness. Pressure. He needed the plan to conclude quickly, which meant something external was pushing him. Maybe deadlines. Maybe financial risks. Maybe something even bigger. Then he said one more thing, something that changed the entire situation. "The investors are bringing attorneys to the dinner," he added casually. "So everything will be official and legally witnessed." Attorneys. That meant the event wouldn't just be symbolic. It would be a formal legal environment, where documents could be executed immediately, where signatures would carry immediate enforceability, and where, if I acted carefully, the same setting could also become something else entirely. A place where evidence could be exposed publicly, in front of people Tyler trusted, people whose reactions he couldn't control. As I stood there listening to him talk about his future with quiet excitement, I felt something settle inside me. Not fear, not anger, certainty, because I realized something important. Tyler believed the investor dinner was the final step of his plan, but in reality, it was about to become the first step of mine. What he didn't know yet was that by the time that dinner began, I wouldn't be walking in as his cooperative wife. I would be walking in with proof strong enough to change everything. 8 days before the investor dinner, at exactly 4:32 in the afternoon, Tyler handed me a slim velvet box and told me he had bought it to celebrate our future after the deal closed. Inside was a diamond bracelet worth about $6,500. I knew the exact price because the receipt was still tucked beneath the padding, and it had been charged to a business expense account linked to the same credit line under my name. That was the moment I understood something deeply unsettling. Tyler wasn't just planning to escape financial responsibility. He was already spending money he intended for me to repay. If you've ever watched someone gift you something with your own stolen money, you know how surreal that feeling is. It's not just betrayal, it's erasure. Because they are rewriting reality in real time, turning exploitation into generosity. Before I tell you what I did next, let me ask you something. If someone gave you a beautiful gift, knowing you would be the one paying for it long after they were gone, would you confront them immediately? Or would you accept it and let them believe their illusion was still intact? I chose to accept it. I smiled. I thanked him. I even let him fasten the bracelet around my wrist, because the calmer I appeared, the less careful he became. And that was exactly what I needed. By that point, Melissa Grant and I had already started assembling a timeline. We had bank records showing unauthorized transfers, device logs proving a fraudulent digital identity, email exchanges indicating premeditated financial liability shifting. But there was still one critical piece missing. Direct confirmation that Gerald Whitmore knew the debt was being placed on me without informed consent. Without that, Tyler could still argue he had misrepresented things to his boss, and Gerald could claim he believed I was willingly participating. That's why the investor dinner mattered so much. It wasn't just the final step of their plan. It was the only moment where their intentions would likely be spoken openly. And spoken openly meant something else. It could be recorded. 3 days later, Tyler came home with an unusually tense energy. He poured himself a drink immediately. Didn't take off his jacket. Didn't ask about my day. Instead, he sat at the kitchen island and stared at his phone for several minutes before speaking. "The investors are pushing harder than expected," he said. I kept my voice calm. "What does that mean?" He exhaled sharply. "It means everything needs to be finalized next week. No delays. No delays." That urgency confirmed something important. There was pressure on him. Probably financial. Probably contractual. Which meant he couldn't afford any disruptions. And that made him vulnerable. Because desperate people make reckless decisions. That night, I made my most difficult decision so far. I placed a small audio recorder inside the lining of my handbag. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I needed protection. Legal protection. Melissa had explained that Arizona is a one-party consent state for recordings, which meant I could legally record conversations I was part of without informing the other parties. And if those recordings captured evidence of fraud, they could become powerful proof. 2 days later, an opportunity came sooner than expected. Tyler received a phone call while sitting in the living room. He stepped outside onto the patio but left the sliding door slightly open. I wasn't trying to listen, but his voice carried clearly through the gap. And the moment I heard Gerald Whitmore's name, my heart started pounding. Tyler spoke in a low, tense tone. "Yes, she's still compliant," he said. A pause. Then his voice dropped even further. "No, she doesn't know the liability transfer becomes irreversible after the final signature." Irreversible. That word landed heavily in my chest. Another pause. Then he said something that made my hands go cold. "Once it's done, I'll file for divorce within 48 hours. Just like we agreed." 48 hours. Not months, not weeks, 2 days. That meant he had already prepared legal paperwork, already planned his exit, already scheduled my financial destruction with exact timing. Then came the sentence that changed everything. The sentence we had been waiting for. "I just need you to witness her signing at the dinner so it's legally airtight." Witness. That word was critical because it proved Gerald wasn't just aware. He was actively participating, helping ensure the liability shift would hold up in court. That was the third layer of betrayal. The one that transforms personal deception into coordinated conspiracy. I didn't move until Tyler ended the call and went back inside. Only then did I allow myself to breathe normally again. Because in that moment, something became absolutely clear. We now had proof. Not assumptions, not suspicions. Proof that both Tyler and Gerald knowingly planned to trap me financially and abandon me immediately afterward. That night, when I met with Melissa Grant, she listened to the recording in silence. When it ended, she nodded slowly. "This is enough," she said. Enough. Enough to prove intent. Enough to demonstrate conspiracy. Enough to challenge the entire debt transfer legally. But she warned me about something else. "This doesn't stop their plan automatically," she said. "They still believe you'll sign at the dinner." Which meant we still had one final step. We needed to prevent this signature from being executed. And, ideally, expose everything publicly. Because public exposure would do something private legal battles could not. It would destroy their credibility instantly, especially Gerald's. A senior executive involved in fraudulent liability shifting would face severe professional consequences. The next evening, Tyler approached me with unusual warmth. He hugged me from behind while I was cooking. "Next week is going to change our lives," he said softly. Our lives. I almost asked him how he could say that while planning to leave me buried under debt, but I didn't. Instead, I asked calmly, "Will there be many people at the dinner?" He nodded. "About 40 investors, executives, and legal representatives. 40 witnesses. 40 people who believed they were attending a routine business event, none of them knowing they were about to watch something very different." As Tyler walked away, I felt the weight of the coming week settle over me, because I understood something clearly now. The investor dinner wasn't just the climax of Tyler's plan. It was the only moment where everything would converge. His ambition, his deception, his timeline, his confidence that I would remain silent. And what he didn't know yet was that I had already decided exactly what would happen when he placed that pen in my hand. I wouldn't just refuse to sign. I would make sure every person in that room understood exactly what he had tried to do. But there was still one detail I hadn't figured out. One critical unknown. Because earlier that day, while reviewing the credit line documentation again, Melissa had noticed something unexpected. A clause we hadn't seen before. A clause that suggested Tyler might not be the only one planning to walk away from the debt. And when she pointed it out, I realized the situation was even more dangerous than I had thought. 6 days before the investor dinner, at exactly 9:12 in the morning, Melissa Grant slid a highlighted page across her desk and told me that if a single clause on that document had been executed correctly, I wouldn't just lose $420,000. I could lose everything I owned for the next 7 years. The clause was only 4 lines long, but it changed the entire situation. It was called a cross-collateralization provision, which meant the business credit line wasn't just tied to future business revenue. It was legally linked to my personal assets, my savings, my income, even any property I might acquire later. If the debt defaulted, creditors could pursue wage garnishment and asset seizure under federal collection law. In plain terms, they hadn't just planned to bury me in debt. They had designed a system that would prevent me from ever financially recovering. If you've ever discovered that someone didn't just want to hurt you, but wanted to control your future long after they were gone, you know how deeply chilling that realization feels. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. If you learned that the person you loved had built a legal trap designed to follow you for years, even after divorce, even after separation, would you still think of them as your past? Or would you recognize them as a long-term threat? Because at that moment, I understood something clearly. Tyler wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to permanently cripple me. That realization didn't make me panic. It made me very, very quiet. Melissa noticed the shift immediately. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. I nodded, but my voice felt distant when I spoke. "I just understand now," I said. "This wasn't impulsive. He planned every stage." She didn't argue, because the documentation made it undeniable. The credit line application timeline stretched back over 10 months. The fraudulent digital identity had been created 8 months earlier. The staged consent forms had been drafted 6 months ago. Even the divorce consultation Tyler had attended, yes, we had found records of that too, had occurred 3 months earlier. This wasn't betrayal born of conflict. It was strategy, executed with patience. That's what made Chapter 7 of my story different from everything before. Because this was the point where my emotions changed. Until now, I had felt hurt, angry, betrayed. But that morning, those feelings disappeared. What replaced them was something colder. Clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you stop hoping someone will change and start accepting who they truly are. That afternoon, Tyler called me from work. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. "The seating arrangement for the dinner is finalized," he said. "You'll be sitting next to Gerald," he insisted. Of course he did, because proximity meant control. It meant he could guide me through the signing process. It meant he could watch my reactions closely. And it meant witnesses would clearly see my supposed willing participation. I responded calmly. "That's fine," I said. But inside, I was absorbing every detail. Because seating arrangements mattered. Positions in the room mattered. Visibility mattered. Every logistical element could influence what happened during the dinner. And that's when I asked a question that seemed casual, but wasn't. "Will there be a formal presentation?" I asked. He paused briefly. "Yeah," he said. "I'll be giving a short speech about the expansion project." A speech. In front of 40 investors, with legal representatives present. That meant there would be a microphone, a central focus point, a moment where everyone's attention would be directed toward one person. And suddenly, I realized something important. That moment could be redirected. The same stage he intended to use to celebrate his success could become the exact place where everything collapsed. That night, I didn't confront Tyler. I didn't question him. I didn't argue. I simply watched. Watched how relaxed he had become. Watched how confident he sounded when discussing the future. Watched how completely he believed his plan would succeed. And the more confident he became, the more dangerous he became. Because confidence leads to one fatal mistake. It makes people talk too much. 3 days later, that mistake finally happened. Tyler came home late, clearly frustrated. He poured himself 2 drinks in quick succession, something he rarely did. Then he muttered something under his breath. "They're getting greedy." I kept my voice neutral. "Who is?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing. Just investors pushing for higher guarantees." Higher guarantees. That phrase stuck in my mind immediately because it suggested something new, something we hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't just Tyler and Gerald orchestrating a liability shift. There were additional financial pressures, people demanding assurances, which meant Tyler might not have been fully in control. He might have been under pressure himself. And pressure changes behavior. It makes people reckless. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I checked his laptop. Not because I wanted to invade privacy, but because at that point, privacy had already been weaponized against me. What I found made my heart start pounding. There was an email draft saved but not yet sent, addressed to Gerald Whitmore. It read, "If Vanessa hesitates at the dinner, we may need to proceed with the alternative option." Alternative option. That phrase made my stomach tighten, because it implied they had prepared a backup plan. A way to execute the liability transfer even if I refused to sign. I scrolled further down the draft, and then I saw the next line. A line that changed everything. "The power of attorney document should cover us." Power of attorney. I felt the air leave my lungs. Because that meant one thing. Somewhere, possibly already executed, there might exist a legal document granting Tyler authority to sign financial agreements on my behalf, without my direct presence, without my immediate consent. If that document existed, refusing to sign at the dinner wouldn't be enough. He could still finalize everything afterward, quietly, legally. Irreversibly. And in that moment, sitting in the dim glow of his laptop screen, I realized something terrifying. The investor dinner wasn't the final trap. It was only the visible one. The real danger might already be hidden in paperwork I hadn't even discovered yet. And if I didn't find it before September 22nd, everything we had prepared so far might not be enough to stop what Tyler had already set in motion. 4 days before the investor dinner, at exactly 1:26 in the afternoon, I sat in Melissa Grant's office, holding a certified document that confirmed something I had feared all night. Tyler had already filed a limited financial power of attorney under my name 3 months earlier, and according to the filing record, it had been notarized as voluntarily executed, which meant legally, on paper, it looked like I had signed it myself. The moment I read the document number, my hands went cold, because it meant the trap was even deeper than we thought. If you've ever discovered that someone didn't just manipulate you emotionally or financially, but had quietly built legal authority to act as you, you know how powerless that realization can feel. Before I tell you what we did next, let me ask you something. If you found out someone could legally sign contracts in your name without you even being present, would you still feel safe simply refusing to cooperate? Or would you realize the fight had already moved to a completely different level? Because that's exactly what this was. Not a marriage problem. Not even just financial fraud. This was identity control. And it meant Tyler had prepared a backup plan in case I ever resisted. Melissa spoke carefully. This power of attorney is limited to financial transactions related to the business credit line, she explained. But if it remains active, he could still execute the final liability transfer without your physical signature, without my signature, without my presence, without anyone questioning it. In that moment, I understood why Tyler had seemed so confident recently, why he had stopped pressuring me to sign early, why he didn't panic when I said I would wait until the dinner, because he didn't actually need me. He only needed time. Time to use the authority he had already secured. The room felt very quiet as that reality settled in. "So, what can we do?" I asked. Melissa didn't hesitate. "We challenged the validity immediately." "How?" "By proving it was obtained through fraud or misrepresentation." She slid another document toward me. "This is a notarization record request. If we can show you were never present before the notary, or that your identity was falsely verified, the entire power of attorney becomes invalid." Invalid. That one word meant everything. Because without that document, Tyler's backup plan would collapse completely. But there was a problem. The notarization had been performed by a private mobile notary, and according to the records, it happened at our home, on a date I distinctly remembered, because that was the same day Tyler had insisted I sign routine tax updates after I got home from a 12-hour shift. He had placed a stack of papers in front of me. I remembered being exhausted, barely reading them, trusting him completely. And now I realized something that made my stomach twist. One of those documents must have been the power of attorney, hidden inside a larger packet, disguised among routine forms. That was the moment I truly understood the depth of his deception. He hadn't just forged my identity. He had manipulated my trust in real time. Used exhaustion, used familiarity, used the rhythm of daily life. So I would sign without suspicion. And because the notarization record showed a witness signature, we needed to know who that witness was. Melissa requested the documentation immediately. When the certified copy arrived an hour later, I felt my breath catch, because the witness name printed at the bottom was someone I recognized instantly. Gerald Whitmore, not just involved in the financial deal, not just planning to witness the final signature. He had already participated in establishing Tyler's legal authority over me months earlier. That was the final layer of the conspiracy. Not just coordination, direct participation in obtaining legal control over my identity. Melissa looked at me steadily. "This changes the case significantly," she said. "It demonstrates premeditated cooperation," which meant if we proved the notarization was fraudulent, both Tyler and Gerald could face serious legal consequences, not just civil liability, potential criminal investigation. But there was still one major challenge. We needed evidence that I had not knowingly signed the power of attorney, because legally the burden of proof would be on me. And that's when something unexpected happened. Melissa leaned forward slightly. "There may be one way," she said. "What?" I asked. She opened a folder containing phone records. "Mobile notaries often record appointment confirmations through call logs or text messages," she explained. "If we can show you were never contacted directly to confirm the signing, it supports fraud." My mind raced, because I knew exactly what that meant. I never received any call or message from a notary. Not once. All communication must have gone through Tyler, which violated standard notarization procedures. But then Melissa added something else. "And if we can locate the notary," she said quietly, "they may testify about how the signing actually occurred." Testify. That word made my pulse quicken, because it meant we might not just invalidate the power of attorney. We could expose the entire scheme publicly, irrefutably. That night, when I returned home, Tyler was in an unusually relaxed mood. He ordered takeout, poured wine, even played soft music in the background. It almost felt like the early days of our relationship. Except now, every gesture felt like part of a performance. At one point, he smiled at me and said something that chilled me. "After next week, everything complicated will finally be behind us." Behind us. He said it like a promise. Like he truly believed I would disappear quietly once the plan was complete. I watched him for a long moment, and for the first time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt distance, because I understood something completely now. The man sitting across from me wasn't just someone who betrayed me. He was someone who had systematically dismantled my autonomy, and that meant there was no path back, only forward. Later that night, as Tyler slept beside me, I received a message from Melissa. She had located the mobile notary. And according to initial records, the notary had documented something unusual during the appointment. Something that didn't match standard protocol. Something that could potentially invalidate the entire power of attorney. I stared at the message for a long time, because if what she suspected was true, then Tyler's backup plan, the one he believed made him untouchable, was about to become his biggest vulnerability, and he had no idea it was already unraveling. 2 days before the investor dinner, at exactly 10:47 in the morning, I sat across from the mobile notary who had witnessed my supposed power of attorney signing, and within the first 3 minutes, she told us something that made Melissa and me exchange a silent look. She said she had never actually spoken to me during the appointment. Not once. If you've ever realized a single procedural detail could collapse an entire legal scheme, you know how quietly powerful that kind of information feels. Because sometimes it's not dramatic evidence that destroys a plan. It's a small technical violation that proves everything else was built on deception. Before I tell you what she revealed next, let me ask you something. If someone used your trust to get you to sign documents without understanding them, and then ensured you never even communicated directly with the official verifying your identity, would you still call that a mistake? Or would you recognize it as deliberate orchestration? Because that was exactly what this was. The notary's name was Elaine Harper. Full name, Elaine Marie Harper. A licensed mobile notary who had been operating in Maricopa County for over 12 years. She was calm, professional, and visibly uncomfortable once she realized why we were there. I remember the appointment, she said slowly, because it felt unusual. Melissa leaned forward slightly. Can you explain what you mean by unusual? Elaine nodded. Normally, I verify identity directly, confirm understanding of the document, and ensure the signer acknowledges they're acting voluntarily. She paused. But that didn't really happen in this case. My pulse quickened. Why not? I asked. She hesitated, then answered carefully. Your husband handled almost everything. He had the documents prepared, and he was very controlling of the process. Controlling. That word matched everything I already knew about that night. Elaine continued. He told me you had just returned from work and were exhausted, so we should keep it quick. He said you trusted him completely and didn't need detailed explanation. That was exactly how Tyler had framed countless situations. Trust as a shortcut. Trust as a tool. Trust as a weapon. But then she said something even more important. When I asked if you understood the document, she continued, You didn't answer directly. You just nodded while looking at your husband. My chest tightened, because I remembered that night now with painful clarity. I had been half asleep, mentally drained, signing page after page without processing them, trusting him to handle everything. Elaine looked at me carefully. I asked again if you had questions, she said. But your husband stepped in and said you were fully aware and just tired. Melissa spoke quietly. Did you receive any direct confirmation from Vanessa before the appointment? Elaine shook her head. Number. All scheduling and communication came through Tyler Brooks. That single detail mattered enormously, because proper notarization procedures require direct interaction between the notary and the signer, not through an intermediary. That alone could challenge the document's validity. But Elaine wasn't finished. There was something else, she added. Melissa and I both leaned forward. Elaine took a breath. Your husband asked me to expedite the process and not review every page in detail. He said time was critical because of an upcoming business deadline. That phrase echoed exactly what Tyler had been saying for months. Urgency as pressure. Pressure as control. And then came the most critical statement of all. I noted my concerns in the appointment log, Elaine said quietly. Concerned. Documented. Written at the time. That meant we now had something incredibly powerful. Independent, contemporaneous evidence that the signing process had been irregular. Not just my word. Not just suspicion. A professional record created before any dispute existed. Melissa's voice remained calm, but I could hear the significance in her tone. Would you be willing to provide a formal affidavit regarding these observations? Elaine didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, because if someone's legal authority was obtained improperly, that's serious. Serious. That word felt almost understated. Because in reality, this changed everything. If the power of attorney was invalidated, Tyler's entire backup plan would collapse. He would no longer have legal authority to execute the final liability transfer without my explicit, informed consent. And that meant the investor dinner truly would become the final battleground, not just symbolically. Legally. But as we were leaving, Elaine said one more thing that made my stomach tighten. There's something else you should know, she added. What? I asked. She hesitated briefly. Your husband wasn't alone at the appointment. My pulse jumped. Who else was there? Elaine's answer came quietly. Gerald Whitmore. Hearing his name in that context felt like a final confirmation of everything, because it meant Gerald hadn't just participated in the planning. He had physically been present when Tyler secured legal control over my financial identity, Elaine continued. He introduced himself as a business partner who needed to ensure the paperwork was completed correctly. Ensure the paperwork. In reality, ensure the trap was properly sealed. That was the moment the full shape of the conspiracy became undeniable. Tyler and Gerald hadn't just collaborated remotely. They had worked side by side from the very beginning. That afternoon, Melissa began drafting legal motions immediately. One to challenge the power of attorney. Another to freeze further credit line activity pending investigation. But she warned me about something critical. These filings won't stop the dinner from happening, she said. And Tyler doesn't know we're challenging the document yet, which meant something important. He still believed his backup plan was intact. He still believed he could execute the liability transfer regardless of my actions at the dinner. And that false confidence was exactly what we needed, because it meant he would proceed exactly as planned, without changing strategy, without tightening security, without realizing his legal safety net was already unraveling. That night, Tyler came home unusually calm. He talked about seating arrangements again, investor expectations, how proud he was of the expansion deal. At one point, he looked at me and said something that made my chest feel strangely hollow. I couldn't have done any of this without you, he said. The irony of that statement was almost unbearable, because in a twisted way, it was true. He couldn't have done it without me, without my name, without my credit, without my trust, without my silence. But he didn't understand one thing. Silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it means preparation. Later that night, as I prepared my handbag for the dinner, I placed 3 items inside carefully. The audio recorder, a copy of the fraudulent device authorization logs, and Elaine Harper's signed affidavit draft. Each one represented a different layer of truth. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not fear, not anger, control. Because now, everything was ready. All the evidence, all the timelines, all the legal groundwork. The only thing left was the moment itself. The investor dinner. The stage Tyler believed would secure his future. What he didn't know was that it was about to become the exact place where his entire plan would collapse in front of everyone who mattered most to him. On the night of the investor dinner, at exactly 7:03 p.m., a waiter placed a black fountain pen in front of me while 42 guests watched Tyler Brooks stand beside me, smiling confidently, waiting for me to sign the document that would legally transfer $420,000 of debt fully onto my name. And when I picked up the pen, he whispered quietly enough that only I could hear. Just one signature, he said. After this, everything becomes simple. That was the moment I knew. He truly believed he had already won. If you've ever watched someone stand at the peak of their confidence seconds before their entire reality collapses, you know how strangely calm the world feels in that instant. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. If you had the chance to expose a betrayal that had been carefully hidden for nearly a year, would you do it privately? Or would you make sure the truth came out exactly where it could never be denied? Because that night, I chose something very specific. I chose visibility. The dinner was held in a private ballroom inside a luxury hotel in downtown Phoenix. Soft amber lighting reflected off polished glassware. Investors in tailored suits sat around circular tables draped in white linen. 2 attorneys from a corporate law firm stood near the presentation screen. At the front of the room, Tyler looked exactly how he always imagined himself. Successful, admired, in control. Gerald Whitmore stood nearby, holding a champagne flute, watching me with the same calculating expression he had worn on our anniversary night. Everything about the scene was designed to convey legitimacy, professionalism, trust, which is exactly why it was the perfect setting for what I was about to do. Earlier in the evening, Tyler had delivered his presentation. He spoke about expansion projections, distribution growth, expected returns. He used numbers confidently. $3.5 million in projected annual revenue, 28% margin increases, a 5-year scaling plan. The room had responded with nods, polite applause, and approving murmurs. He was at the peak of his professional image. And now, they were ready for the final step. The formalization of financial authorization, as the attorney had described it, which was when the document was placed in front of me. Gerald stepped closer, smiling politely. "This is just the final consent acknowledgement," he said. "Standard procedure. Standard. Routine." Those same words Tyler had used repeatedly. Words designed to make people stop thinking. I held the pen lightly. Then I did something no one expected. I set it back down. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. Tyler's smile didn't disappear, but it tightened. "Vanessa," he said softly, still performing for the room. "Everything okay?" I looked at him calmly. "Yes," I said. "I just have one question first." A small ripple of curiosity moved through the room. One of the attorneys adjusted his glasses. "What question?" Tyler asked. I turned slightly so my voice would carry clearly. "Can you explain why this document assigns full financial liability to me while removing all responsibility from you after execution?" The air in the room shifted instantly. Tyler blinked once, then laughed lightly. "It's just a technical structure for business financing," he said quickly. Technical structure, a vague phrase, designed to sound reassuring without actually answering anything. I nodded slowly. "Then why does it include a cross-collateralization clause tied to my personal income and future assets?" This time, the reaction in the room was unmistakable. Several investors exchanged looks. One attorney leaned forward, because now the language was specific, legal, impossible to dismiss casually. Tyler's jaw tightened slightly. "That's standard risk management," he replied. Then came the moment that changed everything. I reached into my handbag and placed a printed document on the table. "This," I said calmly, "is the authorization log showing that the digital identity used to secure this credit line was created without my knowledge." Murmurs spread through the room. Gerald's expression changed for the first time. From confidence to alertness, I continued speaking clearly. "It includes device registrations, IP records, and timestamps, linking all transactions to an email account I never created." Tyler's face flushed slightly. "Vanessa," he said in a warning tone, "this isn't the time." I interrupted quietly. "No," I said, "this is exactly the time." The room had gone completely silent now. Every eye was on us, because this no longer sounded like a routine business formality. It sounded like a dispute, a serious one. I reached into my bag again and placed a second document on the table. "This is a notarization affidavit from Elaine Harper," I said. "The notary who witnessed the power of attorney signed under my name." The attorneys immediately leaned forward. "Because notarization disputes carry significant legal implications," I continued, my voice steady. "She confirmed she never communicated with me directly and noted procedural irregularities during the signing. Now the tension in the room was undeniable. Investors shifted in their seats. Gerald's grip on his glass tightened visibly. Tyler's confident posture had begun to collapse. He looked from me to the attorneys, clearly trying to regain control. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "We can clarify everything privately." Privately. That word revealed everything. Because if it were truly a misunderstanding, there would be no need to hide it. I picked up the pen again and held it between my fingers. Then I said something that would later become one of the most quoted lines from that night. "I don't sign documents I don't control." The sentence landed heavily in the silent room. Short, clear, irrefutable. One of the attorneys finally spoke. "Mr. Brooks," he said carefully, "given these allegations, we need to pause any execution of this document immediately." Pause. That single word shattered the timeline Tyler had built for nearly a year. His face went pale, because the moment the signing process stopped, everything he had planned began to unravel. But I wasn't finished, because there was still one final piece of truth that needed to be revealed. And it was the one detail that would transform this from a private financial dispute into a public collapse neither Tyler nor Gerald could recover from. As the room remained frozen in tension, I reached into my handbag one last time and pressed the small audio recorder onto the table, because the recording inside it contained the conversation they had never expected anyone else to hear. At exactly 7:19 p.m., in a ballroom full of 42 investors, 2 corporate attorneys, and a dozen senior executives, I pressed the play button on a small audio recorder, and my husband's voice filled the silence, saying clearly, "Once liability shifts fully, I'll file for divorce within 48 hours, just like we agreed." For one full second, no one moved. Then the air in the room changed completely. If you've ever watched a carefully constructed lie collapse in real time, you know it doesn't happen loudly at first. It happens in stillness, in the way people stop breathing, in the way their eyes shift from trust to suspicion in an instant. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. If you had someone calmly describing a plan to trap their spouse in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and then abandon them immediately afterward, would you consider that a business strategy? Or would you call it exactly what it is? Because in that moment, every person in that room understood the truth without needing explanation. The recording continued. Gerald Whitmore's voice followed, unmistakable. "Just make sure she stays cooperative until everything is finalized." A collective intake of breath moved through the room, because now it wasn't just Tyler exposed. It was Gerald, a senior executive, a respected figure, directly implicated. The final line played. "I just need you to witness her signing so it's legally airtight." Then the recording ended. Silence flooded the room like a physical weight. Tyler's face had gone completely pale. Gerald's hand trembled slightly as he set his glass down. And for the first time since I had known him, Tyler looked small. Not angry, not defensive. Small. Because he understood something instantly. There was no way to explain this away. One of the attorneys spoke first. His voice was controlled but sharp. "Mr. Brooks. Mr. Whitmore. Is this recording authentic?" Tyler opened his mouth, closed it, then tried to recover. "This is taken out of context," he said quickly. Out of context. The first stage of collapse. Denial. But the attorney didn't look convinced. "What context," he asked calmly, "would justify discussing transferring financial liability to a spouse without informed consent?" Tyler didn't answer, because there was no answer. That's when Gerald finally spoke, his voice strained but attempting authority. "This appears to be a private marital dispute," he said. "It has nothing to do with company operations." That was the second stage. Deflection, trying to shift responsibility, trying to isolate the damage. But before anyone else could respond, I placed one more document on the table. "This is the notarization record," I said quietly, "showing you were physically present when the fraudulent power of attorney was obtained." Gerald's composure shattered visibly, because now The evidence connected him directly to the legal manipulation, not indirectly, not through association. Directly. One of the investors stood abruptly. "Are you telling us," he said sharply, "that this entire financing structure was built on identity fraud?" Identity fraud. Hearing those words spoken aloud in that room changed everything, because this was no longer a private scandal. It was a potential legal and reputational catastrophe. Tyler's voice rose slightly. "This is being exaggerated," he insisted. "My wife signed everything voluntarily." I looked at him steadily and said a sentence that cut through the room like a blade. "I trusted you. That's not the same as consenting." The words landed heavily, because they revealed something deeper than legal wrongdoing. They exposed moral betrayal. The third stage came next. Victimhood. Tyler's tone shifted suddenly. "You don't understand the pressure I was under," he said. "I was trying to secure our future. Our future." The irony of that phrase made several people exchange glances, because the recording had already revealed his real plan. Divorce within 48 hours. He wasn't securing a shared future. He was preparing an escape. One of the attorneys spoke again, more firmly now. "Given the evidence presented, we are suspending all proceedings related to this credit line pending full investigation." Suspending. That single word marked the moment everything Tyler had built collapsed. His expansion deal, his professional credibility, his timeline. All of it stopped instantly. But the consequences didn't end there. Another investor spoke quietly. "If this is accurate," he said, "this constitutes serious legal exposure for everyone involved." Everyone involved. Which meant something else. Gerald Whitmore's position was now in immediate danger, and he knew it. Because he didn't argue anymore. He didn't defend himself. He simply stood there in stunned silence. That was the final stage. Collapse. The moment when people realize there is no narrative left to control. Tyler finally turned toward me. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You could have talked to me privately," he said. That sentence revealed everything, because it showed he still didn't understand. This wasn't about communication. It was about consequences. I looked at him calmly. "I tried trusting you privately," I said. "You used that trust to build a trap." The room remained silent, because there was nothing left to debate. The truth had been spoken clearly, documented, recorded, witnessed, exactly where it could never be denied. As the attorneys began gathering documents and speaking quietly among themselves, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not anger, relief. Because for months, I had been carrying knowledge in silence, watching, waiting, preparing, and now the burden of secrecy was gone. The truth was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone in that room. But as I picked up my bag and prepared to leave, Tyler said one more thing that made me stop. "You're destroying both of us," he said quietly. I turned back and answered with the final short sentence that would later circulate widely online. "No," I said calmly. "I'm just refusing to let you destroy me." And as I walked toward the exit, I realized something fully, for the first time. The war wasn't just over. It had already been decided long before that night. The moment I stopped being silent. His entire plan had already begun to fail. What I didn't know yet was how far the consequences would ripple once the legal investigation officially began the next morning. 3 months after the investor dinner, on a quiet Sunday morning at exactly 9:08 a.m., I sat on a wooden bench beside a small lake in Tempe Town Lake Park, holding a letter that confirmed the $420,000 credit line had been officially voided and permanently removed from my financial record. No liability, no debt, no legal attachment. For the first time in nearly a year, my name belonged only to me again. If you've ever carried fear about something that could destroy your entire future and then watched it dissolve completely, you know how strange that relief feels. It's not loud. It's not dramatic, it's quiet, like stepping into sunlight after months of living in a shadow you didn't even realize had grown around you. Before I tell you how everything ended, let me ask you something. When someone betrays you deeply enough to try to control your future, what does justice really look like? Is it punishment? Is it revenge? Or is it something simpler and much harder to achieve? Peace. Because in the end, that was what mattered most to me. But getting there required the final stage of consequences to unfold. The legal investigation began the morning after the dinner. Within 48 hours, both Tyler Brooks and Gerald Whitmore were formally placed under internal corporate review. Within 2 weeks, the findings became public. The company's board announced that Gerald Whitmore had been terminated for serious ethical violations involving misuse of authority and participation in fraudulent financial structuring. He lost his executive position immediately. At 58 years old, with his reputation built over decades, the damage was irreversible. Industry news outlets reported the story briefly, but the real impact happened quietly. Professional networks closed their doors. Consulting offers disappeared. His name, once associated with reliability, became associated with risk. As for Tyler, the consequences were even more direct. Because unlike Gerald, Tyler faced personal legal exposure. The fraudulent digital identity creation, unauthorized financial transactions, and misrepresentation in obtaining power of attorney triggered a formal investigation. He wasn't arrested, but he was charged in civil court with financial fraud and identity misuse. In the settlement that followed, Tyler accepted full liability for all funds withdrawn under the credit line. He was ordered to repay the amounts personally and was permanently barred from holding financial authorization roles within his industry. In simple terms, the debt he tried to transfer onto me became his responsibility alone, and the career he tried to protect collapsed completely. That was karma. Not dramatic, not explosive, just precise, exactly aligned with the choices he had made. The divorce process, which he had once planned so carefully, became straightforward. There was no argument, no negotiation. Because when the final decree was issued, it contained one small line that felt almost symbolic. Financial identities and liabilities are fully separated. It meant I was free. Not just legally, completely. 6 weeks after everything ended, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I left the salon where I had worked for years. Not because I had to, because I wanted to, because I realized something during the entire ordeal. I had spent too long believing stability meant staying small. So I invested my savings into opening a small independent nail studio. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet, bright space with 6 chairs and large windows facing a tree-lined street. I named it Clearline, because that word had come to mean something deeply personal. A boundary, a place where nothing hidden could cross. The first day I unlocked the door and turned the sign to open, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Ownership, not just of a business, of my life. And that was the true ending of the story. Not the investigation, not the consequences, not even the exposure. The real ending was the moment I understood something that changed how I saw everything. Revenge isn't about hurting the person who betrayed you. It's about refusing to let their betrayal define your future. A few weeks ago, I ran into someone who had attended the investor dinner. She recognized me immediately. After a brief conversation, she asked quietly, "Do you ever regret not handling it privately?" I thought about that question carefully before answering. Then I told her the truth. "No," I said, "because silence is what allowed it to happen in the first place." And that's something I want to ask you now. If you were in my position, if you discovered someone had been quietly building a plan to destroy you financially, would you have stayed silent? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Because stories like this don't start with one dramatic moment. They start with small compromises, small silences, small decisions to trust without verification. And the most powerful lesson I learned wasn't about fraud or legal systems or revenge. It was about boundaries. Trust should never mean surrendering control over your own life. Not financially, not emotionally, not legally. As I sit here now, watching the water ripple gently across the lake, I feel something simple and steady. Peace, no anger, no lingering bitterness, just clarity. Tyler once told me I was too small to understand the world he wanted to build. But he was wrong about one thing. Strength isn't about being loud. It's about knowing exactly when to stop being silent. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own boundaries, your own strength, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Because someone reading your words might be standing at the beginning of a story like mine right now. And sometimes the right voice at the right time can change everything. And if you want to hear another story about a woman who uncovered a hidden betrayal in the most unexpected way, stay with me, because there's always another truth waiting beneath the surface.